Who am I? Why am I here? Where did I come from? Where, if anywhere, am I going? And these are big existential questions which people start to ask. But again, the problem here is that people tend to look for the answers out there in books, in other means, rather than relying on themselves, because they are a unique storehouse of power and information, if only they knew it.
Man, know thyself. Man, know thyself. So, absolutely, it is a work done here. You can read the text, but it's through application, digestion, and self analysis. Really, really brave self analysis. Welcome, everyone, to episode 8. We're already at number 8 of that death show. And I'm Ann Kelly. This is Tim Wyatt. Tim, how was your week?
Well, I've had a rather busy week moving around Europe at a couple of conferences and doing other things up in the Swiss Alps. And it's been wonderful, actually.
Well, I'm really glad to have you back, and thank you for all that you do. I know you are a busy man. You never let the grass grow under your feet at all. And I wanted to tell you, though, thank you for showing up for our podcast, because listen, our numbers are growing. We have more downloads and subscribers for a little baby brand new podcast. We have some feedback that I want to share with you, Tim, and our viewers and listeners to get your thoughts. So first of all, I want to thank Theosophy Station over on Instagram and Threads. It's Theosophy_Station. And their description is they explore the intersection of theosophy and modern life. It is sapere aude, I hope I'm saying that right, dare to know. And that is John G. And John wrote to us, he says, he said it to his subscribers, and I'm really grateful for this. He said, anybody else checking out this new podcast? I listened to a few episodes yesterday, and I really, really like it. I've often talked about the need to make the learning curve to the perennial wisdom less steep. And these guys take a really gentle and level-headed tone, and they introduce core concepts without pulling any punches. Easy enough for a beginner and serious enough for the more advanced student. Totally recommend. Thank you, John G. What do you think of that, Tim?
Well, I know the Sapere Audi group quite well, and I know its leader, David Ciccinazzi, who lives in Georgia. I've done a few talks for this organization over the years, and they're a marvelous group of people, very diverse group of Freemasons from all across the world.
Those are the exact kind of people we want to be able to reach and take it out to the mainstream as well, which you are so, so good at. John also writes here, can we say these things plainly? These are some huge concepts with so many implications for how current events are perceived. And he says, you guys are here telling it like it is. And then he has a question that I'm hoping we can do an episode on. John also writes, I've never considered external forces driving my addiction. The thoughts that come to me when I have those cravings never seemed like my own. I really didn't want to smoke. So I was wondering what your thoughts are. I'm putting you on the spot here on the air. Would you like to do an episode on the spiritual consequences of substance abuse?
Well, I think it might be a useful thing to do, because it does affect an awful lot of people in this modern world who, in one way or another, try to escape from its stresses and strains. So I think it would be a very worthwhile thing to do, yeah.
Absolutely. I think you and I have talked about that. It'll be 2025. It'll be 23 years for me. But I was absolutely huge crash and burn, double felon, all of it. And I was going to share here Blavatsky's words. She writes, no wine, no spirits or opium should be used, for these are like the Lamayan, the evil spirits who fasten upon the unwary. They devour the understanding. She also writes that the use of alcohol has a directly pernicious, destructive action upon the brain, particularly in the pineal gland and the pituitary gland. So alcohol prevents the development of the third eye. So hopefully we'll be doing that very, very soon. We've got a lot lined up for you. Also want to thank our very own Jonathan Douglas. Jonathan gave us $15 last week, Tim.
Well, that's very, very, very kind of him. And I have his picture on my wall.
He's a very talented artist. Please give him a follow over on Instagram and all the things at Oak Apple Studios. He's ridiculously talented. I always say that, but he truly, truly is. And you can watch him in real time. He speeds it up over there. He's just so loving and kind. And he writes, congrats to you, Tim. He's hoping that your documentary, The Myth of Death, wins the nominations it deserves. And if you have not seen The Myth of Death, please, please, please do so. Graciously backed by the Blavatsky Trust. The Myth of Death is the most comforting film I've ever seen on death. It is free to watch on our That Death Show YouTube channel. And it is one of the reasons Tim and I are sitting in these seats today. So every week, we suit up and show up to do our best to eliminate the fear and the mystery surrounding death, to offer comfort and understanding and hope, because we are all energy and death is just a doorway to a new beginning. We've also got guests coming up in the new year, and hopefully it'll be Chris Sheridan as our first near-death experiencer. He is also a guitar player, Tim. He was in a rock band in Hollywood back in the 80s and 90s. And he's written a book called The Spirit in the Sky, a memoir. So also Dr. B will be joining us, and Auntie. So we're looking forward to all that. We have much more coming. We're brand new. Thank you for being here with us for all of it. So remember that understanding death, you can learn the meaning of life. Last week, Tim and I touched on the invisible helpers, the roles of angels and nature spirits and fairies, their role in creating and sustaining and preserving life. And this week, we dive into, this is a big subject, what is the soul? What is the nature of the soul? So before we completely dive in, Tim, let's begin with a question from Jonathan. He asks us here, he says, how can we be certain that the guidance we offer is leading others towards the integration of their true will or their higher self when our individual perspectives are so unique and difficult to translate?
Well, people can only do it for themselves. They have to find their own appropriate ways of doing these things. There is no one size fits all. I've just been reading the work of Krishnamurti, and he broke away from the Theosophical Society because he felt that it was too doctrinaire. And he spent the rest of his life saying, don't trust any creed, any religion, any organization, any guru, even me. So I think that illustrates a man as wise as he, suggesting that we are all on our own paths, and we have to have faith in our own abilities and our own potentiality. And most people don't, unfortunately.
No, we tend to look toward other people and make them, I don't know, superheroes, super gurus. I love that he broke away, and there is much infighting in any human organization, really, including the Theosophical Society. And I want to clarify here that Theosophy is not the Theosophical Society. Theosophy is ancient, it is ageless, it is older than time itself. So thank you for addressing that for our Jonathan. And here on That Death Show, we talk about the astral body, we talk about the mental body and the higher self. Tim, this is a huge question. And we hear soul, spirit. How does esoteric science explain and define the soul?
Well, there are a number of versions of this. One useful version is if we define people as having two separate halves, a permanent half and a temporary half. The temporary half is the personality which we adopt for one life, and that's made up of the physical body, the astral body, an animating principle, which we call the energy body or the etheric body, and the lower mind. And this we retain for one lifetime only. But the soul consists of two or three of the higher aspects of ourselves, which are our higher minds, the wisdom and intuition principle, and the spirit. Now, generally, it's considered that the spirit is not part of the soul. It is something separate. It's our link to that universal energy. So it's often defined that the soul is the higher mental body, the higher mind, plus this wisdom intuition principle. That makes up essentially the soul that reincarnates from life to life.
And wears each one of these bodies as a suit as it goes through the periods. That's the part you get to take with you. And from what I understand is that the higher and lower self, it's easier for me to identify that the lower self is usually the first one up to bat. It's judgmental, it's insecure, it's arrogant, it's ignorant. And then the quieter, calmer, peaceful, loving, compassionate, reasonable one, that seems to me, that's the higher self. You can hear it in there if you quiet the thoughts of the lower self, the physical ego, if you will. So also, I've said this before on this podcast, the vices and the virtues, the ancient ones that have been written about, those to me describe the higher and lower self. That's kind of how you identify them. To me, that's my understanding. But can you please, Tim, explain the roles of the higher and lower self, sometimes called the great battle? What is the point of having two different parts of ourselves?
Well, wherever you get a conflict, wherever you get any kind of polarity, you inevitably get a dynamic and it helps to move things along. Of course, the personality, the lower self, is all desire and goal driven. I want this, I want that. And these are usually very selfish desires. It's not, I want to end poverty, I want to find world peace. Those are things which belong to the higher self because they belong to a series of noble virtues like appreciating honesty and truth and beauty and aesthetics and that sort of thing. And that's not really part of the lower self. The lower self is this tiny little enclosed self, which feels itself separated off from all the other lower selves generally, and not part of some universal dynamic, whereas the soul is very much in that milieu. It's part of that universal consciousness.
Some people have described the higher and the lower self in the esoteric teachings as parent and child. So we have the higher self trying to keep the lower self from complete and total destruction. And I mentioned earlier the great battle. What, if we're listening right now, somebody's listening and they've never heard this before, what can we do to do we have to earn it? Do we have to learn it through painful lessons to get to this part where we go, I can't live like this anymore, there's got to be more to my story? Or can someone who's just come across this and find it interesting, can they learn to access their higher self?
Well, of course, there are a wide, wide spectrum of people, and some people will naturally, once they decide that they have a higher self, because of course that's the first part in the process, until you recognize that there might be something called the higher self, you can't communicate with it and you can't identify or locate it. But once you accept that there is this possibility, there are all kinds of different things that you can do. But generally speaking, when you're working in a busy, noisy, clamoring world, it's very difficult to do that. So these things need to be done introspectively. They need to be done in a calm environment where it's quiet and there's not too many distractions. Some people call that meditation. Some people call it contemplation. There are all kinds of different ways of doing this, and there's no one right way or wrong way. It's a question of finding the right way for you. But inevitably, it's about going within, not just looking at all that stuff that's chattering on in the world outside and all that activity. It's about looking deep within yourselves. And some people find this extremely challenging and extremely difficult, and some people find it, frankly, impossible.
That is the voice of the silence. That's basically the quiet voice of the higher self. I will be honest, Tim. I will say when I was first in this incarnation, I thought that the voice of the lower self, that was me. I honestly thought that was me. And that's all I was. It took a series of severe self destruction, self destructive things, and pain and loss and grief to be able to wake up a little bit. It really was through pain and much of it self induced because I was looking just to find a little bit of peace and some kind of sense in this world. But I couldn't have, if you told me this, if I was listening to this podcast when I was much younger, I don't know if it would have absorbed. It was really, I had to almost earn it through, I don't want to say baptism by fire, but something like that, to be able to cleanse away the lower self and the destruction. What about you?
I think the truth is that it tends to be the case that older people come to this, not people in their 20s and 30s, because when you're in your 20s and 30s, you know what it's like. People are too busy enjoying themselves, working, trying to get money, buy a house, all these things that we do. And there are so many distractions and other things we have to do that it's quite rare. It's not completely unknown, but it's quite rare for people to do that at that age. It tends to come to people during the late 30s or middle age or something like this. And it's often described as people, even who've got everything, nice families, good jobs, all the rest of it, healthy people, they develop something that's sometimes called divine discontent. And there's something missing. Despite everything they have around them, despite wonderful relationships, despite having perhaps even a perfect life in some people's eyes, there is a missing link within them. And this is when people start to ask some of those questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Where did I come from? Where, if anywhere, am I going? And these are big existential questions which people start to ask. But again, the problem here is that people tend to look for the answers out there in books, in other means, rather than relying on themselves, because they are a unique storehouse of power and information, if only they knew it.
Man, know thyself. Man, know thyself. So, absolutely, it is a work done here. You can read the text, but it's through application, digestion, and self analysis. Really, really brave self analysis, self correction, and then self alignment. And remember, the lessons don't stop. The horrible things, scary things, painful things, war, death, suffering, torture, cruelty, that still goes on, but it's how you react to it and how you learn to live. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this show. You have these teachings, these ageless wisdoms, if you'll call them that. They're instructions on how to live, and that's what I have found. And I have found that that is so powerful that I wish to serve them. And as a former radio broadcaster, that's what I'm doing here on all of these videos and TikToks and here on this beautiful podcast with Tim, is to be of service, to get them out there. Because if you're listening and they resonate with you, they are life changing. And it's not about a society, a person, a place, or money. You don't have to pay to belong. It is about a system of living. These are instructions on how to live, and these are ancient. And they've come through in many, many different ways. So today we're talking about the soul and what is it. I wanted to ask the role of free will, Tim, about the role of free will for the soul when it incarnates into a human body.
Well, there's free will on the one hand, but there's also another determining factor called the law of cause and effect, or karma, which is that certain things are dictated by the things that we've thought and done and said in previous lives. But coming into this life with a completely pre-programmed life would be absolutely pointless. And that's where the free will comes in. So we have, within certain limits, freedoms to choose that we go down this path or go down the other path, or we do this or we do that. I think that free will is not absolute free will, and it's almost like a test. And often, if you have two choices, the lower self will choose one choice, the higher self will choose something completely different. And this is where the difficulty starts. Do you listen to the lower self, or do you aspire to the higher self? Because aspiring to the higher self requires dedication and determination and perseverance and overcoming all kinds of obstacles. It's not an easy option doing this.
That's true. It's like the little angel and the little devil. That's what they're talking about. These are your higher and your lower self. You know what we're talking about. You felt this, your conscience. You can hear that talk. I shouldn't do that. That's your higher self talking to you. And if you think about angel, devil, we talked about the devil in several episodes. But I wondered what your thoughts were, because I still see these on TikToks. People who are like, I'm going to sell my soul to the devil so I can have earthly fame, wealth, and status. And I don't know if it's ours to sell. Can you expand on your thoughts on selling your soul to the devil?
Well, I think people have been reading too much Dr. Faustus and similar tales, and these things erupted in Victorian times, and this idea of selling your soul to the devil became popular in culture, in operas, music, books, films, and all the rest of it. But it's a rather mistaken concept. You can't sell a soul. It's not like a stock market commodity. However, you can corrupt and imperil your soul by doing all sorts of things. And if that's what we mean by selling it, then yes, that would be a case of that. But you're not selling it in terms of any financial reward. It would be for some egotistical advantage in this life. And I think that's what people mean. I want to be a rock star and have a best-selling album, and I'll do anything to do that. I'll trample over people. I'll, do anything, go to any lengths in order to achieve my goal, because the lower self says that the means justify the ends.
That is very, very well said. And it's so true when we think about, basically, when I was married to Jack Daniels, I was selling my soul to the devil. I'm going to the lowest possible denominator. And the people who do want wealth and fame and status at any cost, and to step on people and hurt other people, in a way, you are selling your soul to the devil, not in the way that is presented in the airy fairy tales, but you are going to the lowest possible, and you will suffer for that. You will suffer for that. I believe that everything has a soul. Every sentient being has a soul. does esoteric science say this, Tim?
Oh, very much so, right down to even what we regard as inanimate matter, minerals and rocks and that sort of thing. Every atom is ensouled in some way. Difficult for us to comprehend what that would be. Yeah, but everything has a soul because it is a spiritual universe. It is a universe of consciousness. And the material stuff, which we think is the only stuff, is actually quite illusory at the end of the day. Although with our five physical senses, it's difficult to convince ourselves of that fact.
Well, I think science is telling us, though, as I tap here on this wooden table, that these are molecules and atoms moving around at a high speed. Everything is energy. And I think we're getting there. I think we're kind of understanding that. I think we like to say we're all one another, except for those people over there who are complete assholes and I don't want anything to do with them. We still act that way, but we're kind of getting our head around the fact, are we all connected? This oversoul, this Anima Mundi, what do you say for the earth? The earth has a soul as well, correct?
Yes, very much so. It has a soul, it has a mental body, it has an astral body, just the way that we do, and just the way everything else does. So, yeah, we're all part of a much greater body, some interplanetary thing as well. We're not just part of this Earth, we're part of the solar system, we're part of the galaxy, we're part of a cluster of galaxies, we're part of the whole entire cosmos, whatever that is. But because of the way we are, because of the way we're set up and our physical senses, we tend to perceive things just on a very local and temporary level. We don't see the big picture. It's very difficult for people to attain a more cosmic kind of consciousness. But as you said earlier on, Anne, often it's crises in people's lives, addictions, accidents, breakups of relationships, loss of jobs, loss of finance, these big crises in people's lives which seem to act as a kind of cattle prod to the soul to make people connect with it in some ways, because you can always rely on that. The worldly things around you may be temporary and may disappear, but the soul is always with you, not just in this life, not just in the last, but in the next one and the one after that.
And it's all connected to each other. That is the great heresy that we talk about. It is believing that you are separate from all the rest. We are not separate from one another. And if we would only start to act like that, just understand we are one another. So, in a way, that's where karma and reincarnation comes in. As you do unto me, you do unto, uh, as you do unto others, you do unto me. All the teachings, they all say the same thing. I have a book up here that talks about the parallel sayings of Lao Tzu and Christ and Krishna. They've been saying this since the beginning of time. And as you look through, you can see the commonalities of my favorite way to look at it is in Theosophy, in the Theosophical teachings, but there's lots of ways to find this stuff. Just go to the commonalities of all the world's religions, sciences, and philosophies, and you will find what we're talking about here. We call it the perennial philosophy. We call it esoteric science, occult science. Really quick for somebody listening who they hear the word occult, Tim, I always say it's not synonymous with ominous. It simply means the currently not seen. Can you explain for those listening how you view the word occult?
Well, the word occult has got many, many connotations, and people often see it in terms of black magic and rituals involving daggers and animal or human sacrifice, and black magic rituals of all different kinds, and ceremonies and smoke and cloaks and dragons and all that kind of stuff. Whereas it's got nothing to do with that at all. It simply comes from the Latin, and it means something which is hidden, or as you say, not seen, something which is occluded. You can't see it. And that's why we refer to this as occult science rather than material science. Material science deals just with physical stuff because that's all it believes there is, whereas occult science deals with all those hidden realms.
And when you talked about, thank you for that. When you talked about the animal sacrifice, really quick, our Dr. B mentioned that that has been grossly misunderstood, is that it wasn't about murdering or sacrificing these animals, physical animals. It was sacrificing your lower animal nature. You must overcome your nature, your beast like being, and overcome that, sacrifice that to the gods, to your higher self. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, 20th century culture, Hollywood, and all the rest of it has very much, and the literature of the 19th and early 20th century has shaped people's views about all this. And the idea that there is, a devil you can worship, and this devil comes with a tail and horns and all the rest of it. These are just visual cliches which have been really concocted over the years in order to basically make money. That's what it's all about. You create this kind of frightening trope for people, and you imagine that there are these diabolical figures at work to whom you can sell your soul if you want, or with whom you can cooperate. Yes, there are malign and devilish presences, but the way that people regard the devil is very foolish and very, very short-sighted. Eddie Villimoria is very correct when he says that's what it's a symbol for. It's the sacrifice of these lower animal parts of ourselves for hopefully the higher, more noble parts of ourselves.
We talked about Lucifer. We touched on Lucifer before, but I wanted to say that I don't know if this is true or not, but the Church of Satan, I don't think they believe in Satan, this devil. I think they believe in humans and self-focused. Is that correct?
Well, if you're referring to the one in California that was led by a man called
Mm,
Anton LaVey, I think. I've read some of his
LaVey.
books, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of them. But no, it's not about worshipping the devil in that sense. Just the way that when Madame Blavatsky launched her magazine Lucifer, that wasn't about devil worship either, because Lucifer was the bringer of light, whose image has been tarnished by the church, principally down the centuries and millennia. So it's that particular organization, I think they are more akin to pagan worship and the worshipping of nature itself. And this is the new emergent religion, in my opinion, mixing together that kind of earth worship, goddess worship, things you can actually see from nature and the natural world, rather than more loftier concepts. And there's huge interest in this now, just the way there is huge interest in shamanism as well, people getting back to the natural world from which we've become so terribly divorced in recent centuries.
And the churches are emptying out. And I can see the spin, though, the spin that the church would put on that to take away the power from yourself and then give it to the sacerdotal priestlies. You have to have the control over the people. But if we're talking about theosophy, the amount of drama and trolling that I get, that I would imagine anybody who puts this stuff out gets. But I've been doing it for 14 years or whatever now, and it is just relentless from churchianity. But if you would just listen and pay attention, Lucifer, as Tim said, the bringer of light, the morning star, look into it. You don't have to believe us, but there is more to the story. Of course, they're going to spin it because then you wouldn't be going to church anymore. But the answers are inside of you. The only temple you need is nature and your body. It's you. You're the temple. This is where all the work takes place.
If I
Yeah,
may say
go
so,
ahead.
while we're speaking about the church shouldn't be lecturing anybody. Even a few days ago, the Archbishop of Canterbury had to step down after yet another sex scandal in another country involving hundreds of children. So for the church to stand up and start lecturing the rest of us about morality, I think that's a bit rich somehow.
Amen. And thank you for that. That's what we were talking about a few episodes back when I said, isn't it ironic? You have a possession and you bring the church in to be the goodness. And not that there's not good happening in some churches, there is. However, I find it that it's more of a state, it's a government kind of a thing, it's a controlling thing, and we need to come outside of that and look within ourselves. That's the whole point of these ancient teachings is you take the responsibility, you apply it to yourself, you overcome, you transform, and thereby you lift the cosmic consciousness of the earth and you change the world by changing yourself. So you don't have to follow anybody. You don't have to follow us. You don't have to do anything, but you could apply these teachings and they can change your life. And yes, seeing that in the churches, that's exactly what happened. The Catholic Church where I came from, absolutely rife with this crap. And then constantly that's the one thing is the freedom from religion. That's one thing I'm very fired up about. I would love to do nothing but help free humanity and let them know that the power is in their own hands. But it's a tough battle, and it's really the amount of drama that I get just on the one "What is Theosophy" video that I've got on YouTube. You can see for yourself if you want to check out that death show. You can see it just hit 10,000 views, which is great. But you can see some people are interested to learn. Oh, it's a cult. It's Nazi. It's all that. It is not a cult, but because you have to have a leader to have a cult, there is no leader in Theosophy. Can you expound on that, Tim, a little bit?
Well, yes, and it's when religions start to develop this really solidified, centralized ecclesiastical authority, like the Catholic Church, as epitomized by the Catholic Church, but followed by other Christian churches and other sects. When you get the central authority, that's when it becomes a cult. And that's why the Catholic Church is the biggest cult on earth, because it does have a leader. And this is what is entirely wrong. And this is why the churches are emptying. And this is why religion is being deconstructed into something much more basic that people can actually understand and identify with the world around them, the wonderful natural world that we have. And this is what's happening. And I see this happening increasingly over coming generations. The religions won't suddenly disappear, but more and more people will find them irrelevant.
Nature is the true church. Nature doesn't just mean by a stream, it is the ever expanding universe. You are the temple. And the religions, we could go on, I could talk about it forever, but that divides and the suffering and the horror that has happened because of religion. That's one of the reasons that I'm sitting in this chair. If anybody gets anything out of this that helps them, that they can take with them to lead a better life of compassion and understanding and unity and connectedness and compassion, empathy for one another, please, please, please. It can't be doled out by anybody. You cannot buy it. You can't be initiated into it, but you can earn it and you can learn it. And that's what we're doing here. Whew, I get really fired up about that. Sorry. Did
Well,
you want
let
to
me
say
tell you
something?
a little story that I was talking to a woman from the Philippines just the other day, and she was talking about when the Spanish and missionaries came to the Philippines and they rooted out all the wise women who were responsible for herbal remedies, childcare, healing, and all the rest of it. And they murdered all these women and then they chopped them up and fed them to the alligators because they didn't want that knowledge somehow to be transmitted. So they wanted to destroy these women as completely as possible. So these Catholic people knew this stuff worked. They just didn't want it, that's all. And they oppressed it and got rid of it in the most cruel way imaginable.
What is wrong with us? Have we not evolved at all? What year is it? What are we still doing? And I just, it's mortifying. It's horrible to turn on the television. We don't have a television. I do have YouTube on in the background when I'm working, but to see the news, I'm just like, come on. We're better than this. We are better than this. And I do believe that there's hope. Do you have hope for humanity, Tim?
I do. I do. I have to have hope because if we succumb to pessimism, that's going to just drain us of all our energy, and de energized people can do nothing. So we have to keep on hoping because even when things look bad, and I know this from my life and other people's lives, sometimes when things are really tough and really bad, you know that something good could be round the corner. This old cliche, the darkest hour is just before the dawn. And certainly we are in a dark time. We are in a dark place. We are in a violent and uncertain world at the moment. But we have to believe. And if we don't, then that will be possibly accelerating or contributing to our destruction. So the more people who can be a bit upbeat about things and start to be creative, because as human beings, we are incredibly creative people and we can achieve quite a lot, but we can't do it if we give in to fear and negativity.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And I do have hope. I have much hope for humanity. I feel that crushing call of compassion and to suit up and serve and somehow work together. Somehow I can't, it's insatiable. You and I have talked about it before. It's a call to action that is almost maddening. And I want people to know that there is hope. It's not over yet. There's still much good to come, and there's beauty in everything, even the darkness, because there's much more we could talk about there. But anyway, I wanted to get back to the soul, which is our focus of today's podcast. I wanted to talk about, remember McDougall's experiment when they weighed the bodies after death and they noticed that a teeny tiny bit left. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on science actually being able to prove the existence of the soul? Do you think that that's possible?
Well, not as long as science is exclusively concerned with material things, because the soul is far from material. It has no material aspects to it at all. And this is why it's difficult for a lot of people to accept that it exists in the first place. So, by using its current tools or even very scientific tools, there is no way that you can identify this thing that we call the soul. It may be possible in the future for us to see finer states of energy, like the etheric states, which are finer parts of the physical spectrum. It may even be possible for us to see the astral world. I think some people have claimed to be able to film this. Certainly 100 years ago, the Russian scientist Semyon Kurlian, he photographed the auras of plants and everything. So I'm sure it's possible, but the soul will always be an enigma. It won't be perceived by our crude physical senses or even by sophisticated scientific tools and apparatus. It's not going to happen that way.
Not scientifically, but you can feel it because it's inside you. It's inside everything. This soul that you have, this higher and lower self, you can recognize. Remember, we talked about this at the beginning of the episode. You can recognize the lower self. It is the most judgmental, selfish, egotistical, loudest, complain. It talks crap about you and everybody else. That's the lower self. And it wants fame, money, wealth, all that status, cares about what other people think. That's the lower self. The higher self is kind and compassionate and quiet and patient and good and loving. That's how I can tell the difference between the two. And it is never mastered. It is always in practice. Do you have anything you'd like to say to them who are listening, who would love to be able to work closer with their higher self, Tim? Any final thoughts?
Well, it's all about our attitude to life, to ourselves, to other people. And it means behaving with as much degree of responsibility as we can. And that obviously varies from person to person quite a lot. But it also depends, very much upon people showing a greater degree of ethics and morality. There are plenty of people who go to church and then will overcharge their customers on the Monday morning and think that that's perfectly all right, but it isn't. You have to treat people fairly. You have to have a basic morality. And it seems we're living in a world where that morality is falling apart, or at the very least, it's becoming relative. Oh, well, that's not quite as bad as that, so we can do this. It's not like that. We have to develop a higher sense of ethics. And I think this is not just desirable. I think it's essential for our survival.
I don't think I could possibly say it better. That is so beautiful. Thank you so much for that. Remember, it's your own personal experience. Keep an open mind. If you're listening this far, thank you for being here. Thank you for being here with us. This is the perennial philosophy, the occult science, the esoteric science, the theosophy that we talk about here on this channel. We are both just students. We've been studying and applying this. It's changed our lives. We are doing this podcast out of love to share these teachings with all of you. So hopefully it can offer some comfort and hope for a better tomorrow. And so remember, you don't have to have a near-death experience to bring back the wisdom that is gained there. You can have it through study and application. And remember, open mind. And don't forget to check out Tim's most recent documentary and film festival finalist. It is called The Myth of Death. It is available for free to watch, backed by the Blavatsky Trust. It's free to watch on our YouTube channel. It's at That Death Show, because through understanding death, we can learn the meaning of life. That's the point of this whole podcast. So thank you so much for being with us today. Please, please, please like, comment, subscribe, share, help us get these teachings out there so other people can benefit from them. Thank you for being here with us. Remember, this is perfectly explained in Tim's book as well, which is Everyone's Book of the Dead, firewheelbooks.co.uk. And Tim, I love you, and I love you all for listening. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We'll see. Oh, next week, real quick, hang on one second. Next week, we're going to be talking about death and life. It's all part of the same cycle. Everything is cyclical. Any last minute thoughts on that, Tim?
Well, cycles are very important indeed, and it's something that a lot of people don't really understand, but cycles impact on us all the time. And so it'd be very interesting to explore these and look at this continuum of life and death.
Ah, beautiful, beautiful. Breath in, breath out, tide in, tide out, sun up, sun down, moon. It's all cyclical. Thank you. We'll see you next week. I love you.
Bye-bye.
Death comes to us all, but death is not a tragedy. Everyone's Book of the Dead by Tim Wyatt reveals a whole new perspective on what lies beyond this earthly life. The Egyptians have a Book of the Dead. The Tibetans have a Book of the Dead. Shouldn't you have one too? This captivating, richly illustrated book explores the mystery of death by examining it from every angle, sharing the ageless esoteric teachings on karma, reincarnation, and after-death states, as well as examining death and dying in different cultures, religions, and spiritual traditions. Death is not fatal, final, or permanent, but simply a transitional doorway to a new beginning. Get your copy of Everyone's Book of the Dead today at firewheelbooks.co.uk.